Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show that likes to dig near and far on the issues. I'm Robin Adair, and speaking of near, a guy who is very near and yet far enough away that we're not actually in the same place. John Jurisic, the co-host with the most, out in Saanich, the Croatian sensation. And John, what's on your mind today?
Robin, lots. Considering I'm calling from one of the 82 municipalities that we call Greater Victoria Region, I'm pretty concerned about this safe supply of hard drugs seeping into our hospitals. Are you kidding? Addicts medicating themselves in their hospital beds, endangering nurses, doctors, other patients, creating a mess, creating danger. We just haven't thought this through.
And we have a situation where idealists have basically taken over the administration of how we conduct our lives in this society. And we have this safe supply of drugs seeping into the hospitals. And, I realize that we are always trying to find schemes to help the addicts and to help to try to make things safer for them, to give them responsibility, to try to make their lives better. No argument. Some of them will benefit from this, but many of them, in many cases, these addicts are out of control. Addicts are not famous for being responsible people, and giving them the keys to the car, in many ways, all you're really doing is allowing for more accidents, road rage, and even fatalities. And, it's just a big mess, and I think it's the government's fault.
You can't drink in a hospital. You can't smoke in a hospital, at least cigarettes. You can't do a lot of things in a hospital. Why not take dangerous drugs like meth, cocaine? Oh my God. Anyway, government faults come at every level, Robin. For example, arrogant Victoria City councillors thought that they would award themselves a 25% pay increase without any public pushback. Wrong. They've now had to back off with egg on their face. Councillor Chris Coleman was conveniently away when this vote took place and has a lot to say.
I was in Sri Lanka when this motion came forward, or amendment came forward, and Sri Lanka is 12 and a half hours and a day ahead of Victoria. I was about to fall asleep in my hotel room, and my laptop suddenly went crazy. Beep, 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 beep. And I got up and opened up my laptop, and there was this torrent of emails saying, "How dare you louts take a 25% increase in your salary?" And I went, I have no context for this. I didn't know what was happening. I put the laptop to bed. I went back to sleep and thought, I'll deal with it when I get back to Victoria. I come back, and you're quite right. There has been lots of public comment, most of it negative. And I think that pressure was felt by the members of council who had supported the motion in the first place.
I can attest to the fact that it is a full-time job. I love this job. This is the best job I've ever had, by far. Personally, I would like to continue doing this job without needing to look for a part-time job. Between my duties at the city and at the CRD, I simply do not have the time or capacity to take on additional work. Fair pay for full-time work will allow me and anyone else who sits in this chair in the future to dedicate themselves more fully to this enormously important job.
My observation, because I'm a vanilla centrist in the political world, I have friends in all sorts of different political schools of thought. There is a wide range of opinion about how much councillors should be paid. There is not a very wide range about whether it's right to give it to yourself. So immediately, I would say 85 to 90% of the folks that I talked to were somewhere between deeply disappointed and absolutely enraged.
Well, you knew what the salary was. Why are you doing this job if you don't like the job? Well, the fact is that I love the job, and I think it's extremely important. I didn't actually know what the salary would be. I was under the impression that it was going to be dealt with by the previous council, and it wasn't. And just to circle back to my first point, it's not really about whether we should be making a sacrifice, a heroic sacrifice. It's really about good governance and making sure that this job is something that's doable for people who generally don't do this kind of job.
Well, I think the low level of recompense for councillors also acts as a disincentive for the business people. They can't afford to take time off their business to come and do work either. So I think, yes, we need to have a fair and legitimate, deep discussion about what the appropriate level of payment is, but it applies across the board. And sometimes when you say, the youth can't be involved, we also need people with some experience at the table.
What does the power of social media and how that we register our opinions about that impact the community, and how has it in this instance impacted the community in such a direct fashion?
Across the board, people didn't like it. And so you didn't get just one channel saying this is wrong. You had a whole bunch of channels saying, wrong, stop it.
We had run an earlier clip of Chris Coleman where he said there was now a split among the councillors who pushed for the raise and believes appointing an outside committee to handle pay increases is the right move. So do we. We agree with that. Certainly, Councillor Coleman has his fans. Kaylin writes, I love Chris. He's awesome, but the way things have been done doesn't mean that it's good policy. Chris is one of the few municipal politicians who haven't used it as a springboard to higher office. To dampen the public outrage, they ought to have given the next council the raise.
Certainly politics at every level, the talk of the town. We have this civic discussion going on. It's not going very well for Victoria Council. They are wearing egg on their face on this thing. We also have, of course, all the buildup towards the provincial election in the fall, and the federal contest already is looming large in many people's minds. Pierre Poilievre is attracting big crowds all across the country, including Vancouver Island. His Axe the Tax message regarding the carbon tax grabbing attention, and he's consistently doing well in terms of the polling numbers, especially in communities that depend on industry and the resource sector.
In fact, we had a representative from that kind of community, Mark McDonald from the Business Examiner, on the show last week. And he talked about all of the young people and non-traditional support the federal Conservatives are getting. Well, this certainly got some pushback from some of our Liberal and NDP viewers. There's still a lot of people who fear rapid climate change and believe Poilievre is risking the future of our children to win votes now.
Well, there's Lori, who has been known to write us on more than one occasion. We know her back from our chamber days, Johnny?
Sure
and
do.
She sends in regular ideas and takes usually the position from the federal Liberal vantage point. And she doesn't buy this Axe the Carbon Tax campaign and writes us, the forestry, fishing, and trade guys will be out of work as forests burn and droughts and overfishing harm industry. Climate change affects their living, but who needs facts? When rage baiting gets votes, especially when wrapped in ignorance and conspiracies.
Lori, thank you for your input. We always welcome it. Although we might not agree with it, that's not the point of the comments. We welcome them all and thank you for doing that. You know, the Liberals and the NDP are unhappy with Poilievre and the Conservatives for several reasons. A big headache right now is the way the federal Tories' popularity is boosting and seeping into the BC Conservatives' popularity. John Rustad's group are not the same party as the federal Conservatives, but they're happy to piggyback. And according to recent opinion polls, they're actually outpacing Kevin Falcon's BC United Party with just 6 months to go before the writ is dropped.
And we hear from some commentators locally, like Janice Williams, another friend of the show. She suggests people should choose one of the candidates, either from the BC Conservatives or BC United, choose the better candidate, get behind that candidate, and that way we'll always have the best right-of-center candidate to win. The problem with that kind of a formula is I've never seen it actually successfully work out in terms of an election. In fact, I don't think it's ever worked out. But we did ask Professor David Black from Royal Road University what his take was on this whole idea of the split on the right.
There's nothing more disruptive of any electoral outcome than vote splitting. We've seen this in Alberta, of course, with the NDP surprise victory in 2015. We saw this going back some time ago with the collapse of the progressive Conservatives and with the Reform Party cannibalizing the right and Jean Chrétien being elected. We're going to see it here. Vote splitting will just wreak havoc on the center right, at least in this cycle, until those two parties, the BC United and the BC Conservative Party, sort things out. And there's talk of a merger, and we can discuss the likelihood of that.
It seems that we're getting a lot of momentum for the Conservatives in British Columbia, partly because of the rise of Pierre Poilievre in Ottawa. And of course, that's another political battle. But I mean, I do think it seeps across. And we've been very surprised in that by-election for John Horgan's seat, where it was the Conservatives who finished way up in the polls ahead of the Green Party and way ahead of BC United. And it was sort of like, where did that come from? Is it going to take a crashing defeat? I mean, it's taken crashing defeats before for the Reform Party to do a deal with the BC Liberals and Gordon Campbell to rise as Premier. Is that what's going to happen for the right to actually coalesce and have a chance to get power back in BC?
I think so. I mean, both the United and the Conservatives are nominating candidates. I mean, despite talk of a possible merger, they're preparing to campaign as separate parties. And I think that's not likely to change before October. So I think it'll take a crashing defeat.
Okay, so what's behind all this political saber rattling? As been said so many times over the years, it's the economy, stupid. Right now, our natural resource sectors like forestry, fishing, mining, oil and gas, they're all struggling. The growth in the BC GDP is all in government. But in the contrasting that, stock market keeps going up. So what's happening with the economy right now? Well, how do we make sense of that? We thought we'd again turn to Wealth Manager David Schneider to get his take and interpretation on the market. Let's zoom him in. Now, joining us once again in the Victoria Rumble Room, one of our favorite guests, most popular guests, is Wealth Management Financial Advisor David Schneider. David, always so great to have you on board.
Great to be here, especially on this beautiful day.
My stock portfolio, as pathetic as it is, looked a lot better this year. Keep hearing the recession is behind us. However, we also get disturbing signals from Stats Canada, for example. Canada's worst economic performance ever outside a recession. Secondly, business investment is declining. World government debt is on the rise. What's true? That government deficit spending keeps rising. Where is this all going? Tell us the truth, David.
Well, the market's held up a lot better than people thought. The price earning multiples, especially in the States, even with these rate increases on the bond market this past month, there seems to be no end in sight. Fund flow is still coming into equities. What's nice about the market, it's a lot more broad-based than last year. So yes, the top 10 capitalized stocks are a big part of the return, but it's getting much more broad-based. And what also happened was the valuation disconnect to Canada became so extreme that Canada's finally catching up. So we're starting to see the Canadian marketplace, which were almost at historic lows on a valuation basis to the S&P, starting to catch up. There's still a lot of cost cutting that's allowed out there. And one of the most amazing things that people are watching is the AI movement. So it's going to be an absolutely fascinating discussion. And as this person said, we're just in the top of the first inning with this AI transformation. So it's going to be an area that all investors need to keep an eye on. We're trying to figure out what's going on, but we're just starting the cost efficiency standpoint, which will help the bottom line for stocks. And you know, as Jim Thorne talked about, I think the picture was Carl Hubble. They came up with the screwball, and he was able to strike out the entire all-star team because no one saw this before, because it was brand new. AI is completely brand new, and I think we're all trying to figure that out right now.
There used to be a time when it seemed to matter a lot more that we had massive debt happening in government, that there were giant deficits and debt. And the rating agencies would go against countries and they would downgrade us, and borrowing would be more expensive, would drag the economy down. This
Right.
was the big mantra during the Reform Party days. Stephen Harper used to harp on about it all the time. It was a massive campaign slogan. And then we had the pandemic. And then people were actually, I think, grateful that money was being spent to sort of keep the economy going during some very trying economic and social times. But post-pandemic, there's no slowing down on the borrowing, no slowing down on the size of the debt. In fact, it's massive and it's record-breaking. It doesn't seem to change. As a financial guy, should we be more worried about debt than we seem to be right now in Canada?
Yeah, we're to the point. Robin, that is a great point, because I don't understand the debt level. We got to that point during the Paul Martin era where it got to the stage where the service costs of the debt was more than the operating. We're at that level. However, and that's on the federal side, but unfortunately, the feds are putting so much of the services and responsibilities down to the province, which is now going down to the municipalities. And the municipalities only have two groups to go after, and that's business owners and homeowners. And that's what you're seeing. And now they're using real estate construction, real estate development to finance their deficits, their operating costs. That is what Gerald Hart, we talked about, was so much of their requirements to just make ends meet, they're charging developers. And it's getting to a stage here in Victoria. I think, I'm not sure if we talked about it on the last call, two of my top people said, we're at $1,200 a foot. I go, 1,200 a foot. He goes, yeah, that's what you need to make a project viable. So that's 1.2 million for a 1,000 square foot place. And it says, there's just not the demand out there in this Victoria. And that's why you're seeing business just stop. It's getting out of control. And unfortunately, I think those that know are really upset. I listened to Michael Campbell on the weekend with his great show that he has. And he even is, it's just, my voice is getting more stressful because I know this debt level is just completely out of control and something's got to give. So hopefully people are listening out there, but it's, after, I think it was after the numbers started to come out a year and a half after COVID, and 86% of new job growth was government. That just made everybody sick. And it doesn't seem to have stopped. And then when you
getting worse.
Yeah, and you see a 25% increase at City Hall, I'm sorry. That's not responsible, and that's not respectful to the residents.
It's just great to see the stock market finally doing better. For those of us who actually have stocks and bonds, it's great. But think of all the young people out there, young families. Not only do they not have stock portfolios, a lot of them can't even get inside the housing market. They can't afford a mortgage. They're working people, and it's getting so difficult to make ends meet. And really, it's the elephant in the room in terms of us having a future, prosperous Canada. There's a lot of work that still needs to go into that. We're going to talk a lot more about that in future shows. But right now, Johnny, it's just about time to wrap up for another week.
Yeah, that's too bad. I love this kind of back and forth we're going on so many topics. Love it. We really appreciate the feedback we get every week from our many, many viewers. I've said that now earlier in the show. I'm saying it again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. No matter your viewpoint, we're going to represent it on the show. Obviously, if you like the show, and quite a few people do, we encourage you to subscribe for free so you can regularly watch the Rumble Room. Many times, you and I have been applauded and encouraged to keep doing what we're doing because we go deep into the issues, which are not a lot of traditional media does. So we're going to keep doing that. And guess what? You have lots of platforms by which you can choose how to watch us. Certainly Facebook, certainly X, and of course, YouTube. That's where our entire inventory of interviews lives. Encourage you to subscribe and like our YouTube page. We're also have an audio podcast. You can listen to us while you're doing some other stuff. And you can join us on Instagram, which is getting a lot of buzz for us, and on TikTok, which is getting a lot of buzz worldwide anyway. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of the day with TikTok, but we're on it. And for now, I remain your Croatian sensation, Jani Juricic.
And John, I remain your biggest fan and a fan of all the folks that join us on the Rumble Room every week. I'm Robin Adair, and Rumble on.